to the Chasing Light podcast, where photographers and cinematographers talk about their craft and life making images. Today on the Chasing Light podcast, we have esteemed director and photographer Simon Needham. In 1987, at the age of 18, leveraging a 2,000-pound grant from the Prince's Trust Business Program, Simon and James Somerville established the ATTIK agency in Huddersfield, England. Simon served as co-founder and executive creative officer, propelled the ATTIK's ascent to global eminence with clients such as Nike, Lexus, Boost Mobile, Sony, MTV, NFL, Virgin Atlantic, Scion, Coca-Cola, and God, the list goes on. ATTIK became a global agency with offices in London, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Sydney. And in 2007, ATTIK was acquired by Dentsu New York, a network of Japan, and eventually Simon moved on to pursue his passions of directing and photography. Simon has worked with NGOs to craft images for conservation to raise awareness of the plight of animals and places around the world for One Heart Worldwide, GG Conservation, Development Media International, California Wildlife Center, Care for Wild, and Fundacion Natura Bolivia. I knew that one would get me. His work has been featured in numerous magazines and news outlets around the globe. I've worked with Simon in the past, and it is my pleasure to welcome Simon Needham to the Chasing Light podcast.
Hey, Ian, thanks very much for inviting me here.
Thank you for being on. I've wanted to talk to you for a while about your photography endeavors, and I think we have a lot to talk about. And I'd like to start it off with a kind of a question I ask a lot of people, which is, when did you first pick up a camera and get hooked on photography?
Well, you know what? I always enjoyed taking pictures, but I was very often for a long time embarrassed to be the person taking the pictures. Never mind even more embarrassing to be in them, but even holding the camera when people are looking at you. So it took me a long time to take photography seriously. Or be confident enough to be able to take pictures. I originally started shooting towards the end of my time at ATTIK, working for my clients. I'd already been directing for at least 15 years, but never did any photography for any of the clients. And then I just started doing some small projects for clients. Until I started to realize that photography is actually, in some ways, more enjoyable and more. There's an instant kick from taking a photograph relative to directing. Directing's a long process, months potentially to get a project started, shot, edited, and delivered. Whereas photography, you're almost getting that instant little hit when you take a shot. And you're like, dude, this is a great shot. Gives me a little bit of an exciting moment. And I started to realize I actually enjoyed it potentially more than directing. I know that's usually the opposite that people are aspiring to, but I think photography ended up being a sort of a more fun process for me.
Yeah, there's something about that work that you do to get that one still image, that's rewarding,
Particularly when you're doing like sports photography or athletes and so on, where you're trying to capture that single, literally not even a tenth of a second moment where they're in peak performance, when they're in the air, when they're doing that somersault, jump in the air, whatever it might be, getting that exact moment where they're at the top of their moment, that position. And then seeing it on the back of the camera and just like, shit, we got it,
Yeah. And I, looking through your work again, you really do capture that moment of someone in motion. And I really, probably, I have to say, better than most photographers that I've seen. I don't know what it is, but you have I'm sure you're using, multiple frames that you're capturing at a time, but you're choosing that, really peak moment, and it's really beautiful. And we can get more into that because I do have questions about sort of your process and how you do some of that stuff. But you mentioned photography when you were at the attic. Did you get the opportunities to do photography when you were at the attic? Because I know now, like, a lot of times the directors or DPs will also they'll book a photo session at the same time, right? So that they've got the talent, they've got everybody there. Did you get the opportunities to do that, or were you hiring other photographers or whatever to come in and do that work?
So it was a combination. As time went on towards my time specifically working with Toyota, I got involved more and more in the photography aspect of it, and became sort of photographer director. Typically, it was a commercial shoot with video content. A commercial shoot with stills content produced at the same time. I don't know. I just started to get requested more and more by clients to do the shoots. Obviously, there's probably a cost saving too. And on my side of the coin, I guess I had a shorthand to the client. So I was lucky enough to be able to get essentially what were relatively big projects at the time.
Yeah, you guys were agency of record, right, for the Scion account, and that was one of the projects that I got to work with you guys on.
Exactly. Yeah.
An amazing project. I mean, I got to work with like 3 other studios and you guys in terms of each studio kind of had an animated piece, right, of a different version of a Scion car. So
right. Was that something to do with the box heads or something? That was one of the more wacky things that we did in some of the earlier days working with Scion. But yeah, the whole point of that was to be appealing to a youth audience, an audience that Toyota really wants and needs to keep that sort of youthfulness within the brand. Otherwise, people are just aging out of Toyota. So our sort of plan was to bring in a whole new set of young people into the industry that hadn't really considered Toyota up until that point. So there was a lot of strategy involved in that as well.
Yeah. And you guys were doing some amazing cutting edge work. I mean, I know a lot of people were looking at the work that you guys were doing, and it was just, incredible to see. So,
right. No, a lot of fun. Definitely an enormous amount of fun. It's great to work with a brand like Toyota that has, pretty deep pockets. We had the luxury of working with some very talented people, and also just being given opportunities, because this brand really, they did need it to be different. So we were given creative opportunities that a lot of brands wouldn't necessarily have given us.
And I'm sure the headaches went along with it.
For sure. Every single time. But, I don't know. I mean, at this point in time, I've learned so much because of those headaches that if it wasn't for those headaches, I don't think I'd be as wise as I am now in relation to production,
Sure. So you've sold the company. You're, you've decided to get into photography heavily. And how did you get started working with, NGOs and photographing wildlife and cultures around the world?
So, obviously from a commercials perspective, well, just take a step back. We sold the company and then it was a case of, okay, well, I did 6 months where I'd retired because, technically I could retire, and realized that retirement was 100% not for me. It was the worst choice ever to just sit at home twiddling your thumbs and having no goal. I had no goal. I could only go to the gym so much, so.
And you had been in this hamster wheel, right, for so long,
yeah,
right, running a company.
I didn't even really know the entrepreneurial passion that I had, because I'd always just been doing it. So it never really dawned on me that I was so. I needed a mountain to climb, metaphorically, and I didn't have one. And so, I went out and started pushing my photography a little bit more, particularly in the athletics arena. But at the same time, it was like, well, I don't have to do this now. So I really want to have what other things do I really love? And I used to love traveling. I always enjoyed traveling, even just when we were going from office to office around the world. And I met a friend of mine who was shooting for NGOs, and she basically said, "Hey, you can, like, these guys will sort of, they won't pay you, but they'll cover your costs to go and photograph for them in different parts of the world. It's not pleasant." It's definitely, yeah, I've got all kinds of horrific stories, but in some sense, it's real adventure, and that was definitely the path that I was looking for, is something exciting and new and unique. So then I'd spoken to one charity, One Heart Worldwide, that built birthing centers in Nepal and around the world. And
Wow.
they sort of brought me on board to do a 2 week shoot in the Himalayas, where we did a 150-mile trek across the Himalayas to these tiny little villages where, I got the opportunity to photograph these young kids in schools in the middle of nowhere. We were sleeping in tents, we were sleeping rough, we were sleeping in, bed bug, flea ridden beds. I mean, the, I was waking up in tents with an inch of water. I
Oh my
mean, it
God.
was a rough situation, but retrospectively, I've got some crazy stories to talk about that. And then,
Yeah.
and it was fun, and I really enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the photography itself, capturing some portraits of some of the people that they wanted to capture. And since then, I've probably been back 5 or 6 times over to Nepal specifically.
Wow.
And then I just started opening up and putting myself out there to other people that were in, other NGOs that that needed photography. And I knew that they needed quality photography to help them promote themselves. At that point, I was also advising a little bit to these NGOs in terms of marketing advice, how to promote themselves, because a lot of NGOs are running in, doing things that they believe in, but they've got no marketing expertise. So I started supporting them from a marketing perspective. And then one day I'd put some stuff on Facebook, and um, a friend of mine that I hadn't spoken to in 20 years reached out and said, "Hey, if you want to come and shoot my lions," not literally, like photography. I used to get in trouble for saying shooting these lions.
Right. Right. I know.
Um, so yeah, you should. I said absolutely. So it was down in South Africa. So I flew out to South Africa and I started to shoot some content for this NGO called GG Conservation. And yeah, I ended up absolutely loving it, spending time with those. Obviously, from Huddersfield in England, we don't see a lot of lions there. So
Yeah.
for me, it was like quite an experience and something that I loved. And I've never really been around many animals. So to me, it was a, a mind blowing experience to be so close to such beasts.
Yeah.
And
They
then,
had these like plexi cages, right? That you could like
yeah,
go
one time,
into and
yeah. So they built like this plexiglass box, and we would go into their um, like they're just huge areas where these lions live. They're separated off, but in huge spaces. And we would go on the back of a tractor with the plexiglass being dragged along the grass, and then we would sit in the middle of these compounds, if you like, and I would be inside the box with a camera, and the lions had obviously come up to the box, and yeah, I mean, they were climbing, jumping on top of the plexi box. They were trying to get into the plexi
sure.
box.
What kind of food is this?
Exactly. I mean, again, they really are like, if you imagine a regular household cat, they have the same kind of, intrigued instinct, need to play, to just, find out what's going on. And yeah, there's some hairy moments for sure when you're in a plastic
I
a
bet.
plastic box surrounded by lions. I had lions sitting on top of me. Um, yeah, it was. We had some great. I've been lucky in the fact that I've had the opportunity to shoot for a lot of wildlife sanctuaries now, all across Africa, and yeah, got lots of fun pictures with them.
I've never gone. My uncle has gone a lot to
Mhm.
Africa, and I hope to be going this November.
Oh,
Um,
dude, it's going to be fantastic. If you need any suggestions or hookups or connections, just let me know.
I will. I'll talk to you before I go.
Okay.
My uncle has a guide that he's known for many, many years, and so we go with him. But you know, obviously, any guidance would be great for
Absolutely.
us.
I'd love to help.
So, you know, with G&G and the Lions, is that the same place you shot the white lion? There's like a famous white lion, right? That you
Yeah.
had shot. That was
He's called Moya.
okay.
So some of, yeah, so I sell the prints as well. I sell, either just really huge format prints or ultimately just smaller ones that are on my website. But this particular image ended up, going viral a little bit, and then I had Aussie Hair, Aussie Shampoo, contact me from Europe and wanted to use Moya, the photograph I'd taken of Moya, in their ad campaigns and so on. So Moya ended up becoming a little bit of a world star because of his just mind blowing, mane. He's just got this
Yeah.
unbelievable. And not only that, but I've spent a substantial amount of time with him now, and he's just an amazing animal. I mean, again, certainly behind a fence, he's not
Right.
that amazing where you can go patting him on the back kind of thing.
Right. Right. Nice kitty.
Yeah, exactly. But he's definitely mild mannered relative to some of the ant lions that I've come across. I mean, he is a really cool cat, as
Yeah.
they say.
Has I mean, I know you would like at one point, you know, NFTs were in and you were trying to raise money, right? Through
Yeah,
NFTs and selling photos and uh I think there was one thing about like winning a trip, right? And all of that stuff.
yeah.
Is that still going on or is that kind of finished now?
Well, the NFTs were for sale.
Right.
Sold few, but we, of course, our timing was absolutely the worst possible. I mean, it was like the week before everything collapsed. So we
Yeah,
did sell
I was in
some
the NFT
NFTs.
world for a while too, and you
It
know,
came and went a little bit, right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's still trying to bubble up, but that's because I think a lot of people have invested a lot of money that they're trying to get back.
Well, it's a
Uh,
great place for art. I mean, you know, the idea of artists being able to be in control and sell their art
yeah,
and have, you know, legacy payments over long periods of time when the art exchanges hands, I think is a fabulous concept,
yeah,
um, you know, and I probably eventually one day will come back, you know,
yeah.
but
I
it's
mean,
ahead of its
I,
time, kind of.
yeah, I saw. I mean, I saw the opportunity because I mean, I'm consistently trying to raise money for Gigi, particularly just because I work with them so much. And NFTs at the time just seemed like a good opportunity. The wildlife world um, hadn't been utilized to sell NFTs with. It was mainly people trying to make money for themselves, whereas we were trying to like raise money for a charity. And there was the intent before it all fell apart to be able to sort of send somebody over to Africa and experience that, jumping in the plexiglass box and being, having an experience like that. But it all fell apart before we got a chance to sort of complete the whole project.
Yeah, that's
So
too bad.
yeah, but it was worth a try.
Yeah. And how is Gigi doing now? I mean, is it
Uh,
still a
so when I first went there, I was, again, Susie runs is one of the main managers there. She basically is my contact, and they weren't playing around with social at all. They just didn't really think much about it. Didn't and we got talking, and I was encouraging them to sort of build their social media platform. This is going back a while now. I mean, it was still pretty warm, was Instagram, but not necessarily what it is now. And then now they've got, I mean, somewhere in the region of like 3 million followers across all their platforms. They had 50 followers on Instagram when I met them. And now they're just absolutely killing it. And Susie's got hold of it and she's run with it unbelievably well. But from a social media perspective, Gigi are doing phenomenal. And obviously it brings in donations and so on from it. So it's great.
well, that's great. Because, you know, I think it's a great cause, saving these
100%.
animals over there. So I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which was, capturing people in motion. And God, I
Yeah.
love your work photographing the human form in motion and the graphic nature of it. And you incorporate shadows and light effects and graphics
Mhm.
and water, smoke, fire, multiple exposures, you name it. I
Yeah.
mean, and you really seem to have experimented and continue probably to experiment. Um, and there's a graphic feel to these client and brand photography pieces that you created. Where does that come from? Is that from like being a graphic artist in your art training, or is it just something you've kind of developed as your photographic style? Or and I'm not saying you're pigeonholed into that, because
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
work is very broad, but in that kind of human sports stuff, you
Yeah.
know,
I would say that probably the influence is from ATTIK and from our sort of like youth marketing days. We also published creative books
yeah.
that were just purely about graphic design and design aesthetic. Um,
Was that Noise?
Noise, yeah, the Noise
Yeah,
series of books, yeah.
yeah.
And I don't know. I've always, obviously, I've just got that passion for creativity. Maybe you might want to say, or design, or graphic elements and stuff. So that I think, yeah, I would say that I hate. I'm not good at learning. I'm not very. I would say that I've definitely got ADHD, and I struggle to learn anything technical. So when I picked up a camera, the most daunting aspect of photography for me, besides being looked at while I'm taking pictures, um, was
Really,
learning.
you were self-conscious of people
Yeah,
watching you take those
oh,
photos?
yeah, I've never been, like even doing this, I'm not super comfortable. Being on stage is like a horrific nightmare for me every time. Um, but yeah, so the other daunting challenge for me was the technical aspects of the camera. And the only reason that I did learn the camera, and I certainly wouldn't say inside out, but learn the camera enough was because I knew that there were opportunities inside the camera for multiple exposure and so on, and many other techniques that I really needed to get in the image. So I was aspiring to a certain style of image, and I knew that it was achievable in the camera. So I would force myself through YouTube videos and whatever else to be able to learn how to utilize the camera to its best ability. But I will say before we had the high speed cameras, my original sort of moments where you capture the athletes in midair were done one shot at a time, and that was kind of like one of my. I always prided myself on like almost the timing of it, because obviously there is that just one moment.
So you weren't shooting multiple frames while you were doing it. You literally were
Yeah, not in the
were
beginning, 100%.
yeah.
Yeah, in the beginning, I was like, I would sync up. I kind of had. I've been in. I've been in sport a long time myself. I do a lot of training and stuff, and all kinds of fighting and stuff like that. Um, and I've always had a good sense of timing. So that was kind of half the buzz for me. And when I say look at the back of the camera, it was when you'd have one chance. There's a guy that would do sort of like a push up from would stand go in a handstand, and like these guys are amazing. He can go into from a handstand, clap his hands, and go back to a handstand.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so you can imagine the speed of that moment where his hands are touching, and to be able to capture that was he's like shit. I got it.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of those shit I got it moments in your
Yeah.
photography. I tell you, there's some amazing shots. Like I mean, just people in air, and I love how you incorporate the shadow of
Hmm.
them too in some of the
Yeah.
photos that you've done. And your lighting is really great. I mean, the colored lighting.
Gels and stuff. Right.
Yeah, I mean, really, you just capture something in my view that's very, very unique. And
Thank you.
you know, just bodies in motion, these amazing, uh, athletes and their bodies and muscles and all these different things. It's really cool. And I love how you incorporate other aspects, like the girl that's laying down and you're seeing her, her ass and the rest of her body, but you've got all these ropes,
Right.
around, and you're just really good at kind of telling that story
Mm-hmm.
with the form of
Right.
human body.
I mean,
So
I think obviously I've got an admiration for the hard work that these people put into it, because when you see somebody's body, and yes, there is genetics involved. 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100, nobody's born with the genetics that have these kinds of figures and shapes. And so, I think I have a lot of admiration and respect for these people and the hard work that they're putting into it to be able to achieve that. And then to be able to see sort of the athletes that are more gymnastic based, that again, it's just unbelievable how they manage to get to a point in their lives where they can do things that are just mind blowing in terms of the positions they can get themselves in and stuff.
yeah. I was just up at Death Valley, doing some landscape photography, and I love the shots that you did in the sand dunes
Yeah.
with the fabric and I mean, it's just amazing. Those shots are really spectacular. Was it just you and the talent, or did you
Yeah.
have like a crew of
No, but
people with you?
for those, it was more like wanting to go. I mean, I love Death Valley. I mean, I like anywhere remote. I'm kind of one of those, like, go off to the middle. I love the adventure of it.
Yeah, I do
And
too.
I'd seen on Google Earth some sand dunes in Death Valley that looked um, completely untouched. Like, you can zoom in far enough where you can tell if there's car tracks on it and so on. And I found these dunes in Death Valley that really are in the middle of nowhere.
Is
And
that the 3-hour drive on the dirt road that basically you have
it
to have
is
a
a dirt road that
four-wheeler?
you go on for a long
Yeah, yeah,
time. Um,
yeah.
but then there's also a walk that you need to do because the road stops, and then if you're ever interested, I can tell you where
Sure,
they are,
sure.
because they're not known, they're unknown dunes. Um, and yeah, so went there, took the model, and I just knew that I was going to get these virgin dunes. And it's I mean, you'll understand that when you've got a sand dune that has no say damage, but people walking on it, no track, trails and so on. It's a rarity. You've really got to go to some other country and be in the middle of nowhere to find those types of things. So
Yeah.
I think that was what was exciting to me. Just being able to, and it was a job. I mean, carrying my camera gear for at least 2 miles in sand.
What do you
You
shoot
know,
with? Are you a 35 shooter, or are you
yeah. So I've got an R5,
okay?
a Canon, and then I, I, st- I've st- I rent lenses now. So if I'm shooting with, if I've got projects that I'm shooting for clients and so on, then I'll rent the R5 lenses. But I'm struggling to decide whether to buy lenses because everything's shifting so much, as we're probably going to touch on in terms of AI and so on, that it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's challenging to know whether to even pay for these bits of technology now,
yeah,
considering what options we've got coming up, or
yeah,
now.
yeah. What I mean, what are some of the brands you've shot for as a photographer? Outside, since you retired per se from the attic. What are some of those brands that you've shot for?
Yeah, I
I've
mean,
seen.
obviously I've shot for quite a few of the brands that are known from my client days, for several of those. Done a lot of apparel brands that are relatively well known as well, mainly because apparel tends to be where there is a lot of opportunity for photography. As well as I've just recently finished shooting. I don't know whether it's things are changing, but certainly I've been shooting more celebrity type people. I've done one individual which I can't say who it is, but has made an enormous change in his body, and quite an amazing shift. Somebody that, at some point in the future you'll see these images, but it's basically I think they selected me to be able to show off the success that he's achieved with his, what do they call it, like a
Transformation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, transformation.
Yeah.
So I've done a whole range of different brands and different clients, but I don't know. I actually sometimes it's the creative stuff tends to be just for fun. Those are
Yeah.
the kind of opportunities I think that where the truly creative opportunities come, because there is no money involved, and I'm working with, like I said, really great talent that just wants great shots and is willing and open-minded about creativity. And so
go ahead. Sorry.
No, so I'm finding that actually it's that the less people are involved, the more creative I can be. And the more people are involved and the more sort of specific the shot requirements, the less flexibility there is in that world.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you just want clients to go away and just let me do it and show you some cool stuff when I'm
Yeah, no,
away.
but I must admit as well, it's also kind of a little bit nerve-wracking when there's a lot of money involved, that I potentially unconsciously lean towards the more conservative approach. Typically, if there's time, if we have enough time within the shoot, like towards the end or whatever, or I know that, my schedule's good and I've got a window of time, I will do some additional, more unique content, which, often the client will be like, oh, well, we're wasting time here. And it's like, well, just let me do it. You know what I mean? Because I know we've got the shots you wanted anyway. So
yeah, and how many times is it those shots that are the ones that they look at later?
yeah,
And go, wow,
exactly. And
those are
it's like, oh,
incredible, right?
these are really cool. And it's like, well, yeah, I did say that, but I knew you wouldn't. I know you didn't want to let me do it.
Right. Is there a project or shoot, that you've done, in photography that you just were like, this is just amazing that I'm getting to do this?
I think in some sense, like when you shoot more of the celebrity stuff, there is sort of it is cool to be able to be invited into something like that. Obviously there's a hell of a lot of photographers out there that can do that job. So I think it's kind of in some respects, it's just probably a little ego boost that they picked you.
Yeah.
They picked me, yay!
Right.
Like that stuff. And then the stuff that like I said, the stuff that I really enjoy is the stuff where there's an element of adventure to it, or just uniqueness in terms of, typically, I like the outdoors. I love unique environments. Maybe it's more fulfilling as well when you've worked harder to get the shot, or it's more dangerous in some sense. If you've done like a 2-hour hike to get to a completely clear, transparent lake, or it's literally ice cold, and you just needing to get that shot, and nobody's comfortable, but you get it. I think those are the sort of times that I enjoy the most.
Yeah. Switching gears for a second, I'm going to get a little philosophical here on you, and you can tell me what what your thoughts are on this. But you wrote on Instagram, I found an Instagram post, and you wrote, "What defines art? Its intent, its medium, or the reaction it provokes? If a nude statue is in a museum is revered, but a modern photograph is censored, is the difference in the art itself or in how society chooses to see it?"
Right.
I just thought that was really cool. Because, you see David and his penis is out, or you go and, the statue, but yet we can't show the human form. And especially here in the United States, I think in Europe, they're much more used to seeing the human body, maybe. Yeah. But here in the States, in Europe, you go to the beach, people are, topless, whatever.
Right.
Here, people freak out, what were your thoughts about that? And was that stemming from some
Well,
particular shoot or something
yes,
that you...
exactly. It did stem from that in some sense, in that, sometimes when there's this sort of, and I've also sort of somewhat looked down upon guys that shoot females, and it's just all, I'm going to use the term tits and ass, and it seems like as a photographer, if you're shooting that type of photography, you tend to, like, these guys have got hundreds of thousands of followers and so on, and at the same time, I always kind of stayed away from that because I felt like, I don't know, there's just sort of a degree of less value in that, in some sense, or less creativity. Again, not to suggest that some guys are not phenomenal photographers in that world, but I then started to sort of, I had a couple of people approach me that were more in that field. They were really successful models. And I sort of almost had a battle with myself, as well as like this idea of being judged by people for doing that type of content, because it's almost like a reflection of my judgments in some sense, like, why is one thing okay and why is another not? And then again, going into the way that I'm, the things that are happening now, and again, I know we're going to touch on this, but in AI, where, all of a sudden it's not within their parameters, the LLM's not comfortable creating an image that's essentially not even in any way, shape, or form sexual, but it's, there's so many limitations now. But yet, for example, you prompt an AI to give you a statue, it'll knock it out no problem. But if it's, it's all in how you prompt it. But the whole thing's just an anomaly to me, and I'm just trying to get my head around it. And I think it was just in support of the images that I posted that were a bit more in that vein, which I felt were sort of still arty and something that you could have on your wall, even though they are, feminine and so on. And it just got me thinking about the whole subject itself and whether or not, I think to some degree it was an insecurity about being judged for the pictures too, honestly.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I think you do them incredibly tastefully, and it's you're really showing off, the body. And
I mean, just showing off what,
so.
I mean, it is trying to just demonstrate the appreciation.
Absolutely.
And that sounds, you could certainly jest around with that statement, but it really is. Like I said, people work really, really hard to get to what they've got, sometimes.
Yeah.
I think being able to capture that and show it off is respectable,
Absolutely. So, hitting on that, the AI stuff. I know you've been experimenting with AI over the last few years. Tell me about your thoughts about AI and photography and image creation in general. And I mean, you've kind of really embraced it. A lot of people are,
Fighting it.
not sure yet.
Yeah.
Me personally, in graphic design and everything, the tools have changed over the 30 something years I've been, doing that work, producing that work. And, so for me, it's another tool. Obviously it has its downsides and its upsides. But it's just another tool that artists and everybody have to learn. Unfortunately, it contributes to the reduction of the workforce, because you can do all these amazing things. Yeah. But you still need to know about, lighting and lenses and
Absolutely
camera motion and all these different things.
Yeah.
Because you're prompting it, and if you don't, garbage in, garbage out, right? You don't put in the correct information, you don't get out of it what
yeah,
you
there's
might
levels
want.
to that in the same way as there is in photography or anything else, I think. Yeah, it was about 3 years ago that I really sort of started to. Back in the day, I was playing with Stable Diffusion and DALI and stuff like that, and it really dawned on me, even in those horrific images that it would put out, that life's going to this is the moment that life is going to change for creatives as we know it.
Yeah.
I think Jim and I, or ATTIK, we were always somewhat passionate about the future, passionate about what's next. And I think that having seen and experienced moments of AI at that time, it was like, this is going to change the world for sure. There's no question. I've always, in some small way, considered myself a little bit of a futurist. I've kind of always had a sense of what's coming. And so I jumped on the back of that about 3 years ago, started dabbling with it, playing around with it. And at that point, I knew that this was going to have an enormous impact on photographers, and ultimately it's going to have an impact on every creative on the planet in some sense, apart from probably, your classic painters and so on that want to continue to paint. It's not really going to impact them. I mean, it changes the competition, but as long as you want to paint, you can paint. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so for me, it was like, I want to get onto the back of this now, 3 years ago, really ride this sort of wave that's coming and ensure that I'm in a position where, whether it's photography or image generation, that I'm at the forefront of that, and I'm able to produce content that is going to appeal to a client or a request or a brief in the same way as a photograph would. So yeah, that's when I first got into it, is about 3 years ago, and I started to realize that life's going to change for all of us. And it's exponentially changed. I mean, like, if we'd have spoken a month ago, it wouldn't have been what it is today. Just phenomenal, the speed. And then, and more so now, I got very much into it and started being far more interested in the industry beyond just tools for art and so on. And just recently, I've been advising 2 or 3 different creative agencies on exactly that. Some business aspects, as well as like AI tools and AI implementation across the agencies.
And how has AI changed kind of your workflow? Do you still shoot images and then enhance them with AI, or do you use AI to pre-visualize a shoot, or are you just creating images like that you can imagine that you wouldn't even be able to shoot?
That's a great question, in that I do use it for every aspect of it. I've got a shoot coming up in a pool, and the pool has a clear bottom, so I actually can shoot from underneath. It's a glass bottom pool or something. Cool. And I won't see who it's for, but I was able to create the images or the look and feel of those images that I'm aspiring to on a storyboard prior to actually shooting it, so that the client gets the vision, they understand the vision, they understand the aspirations that I'm aiming to achieve, and therefore also represent to the sort of model and so on at the time on the shoot days, because they get what you're trying to achieve. They see the sort of concept, and therefore give you the motions, the moves, the shapes, and so on that they recognize you're trying to achieve. So in that aspect, absolutely, sort of in some sense previs, and then also in terms of, like, obviously within the Adobe tools now it's all built into Adobe tools, so there's a lot of cleanup that you can do.
Yeah, the only thing I'm finding, some new stuff just yesterday. They're in new versions that they're coming.
Firefly's doing some crazy shit right now. I mean, again, it's another tool that I've played with, but I need to learn more. It's like, where do you put your time? Because there's so many aspects just to AI, never mind all the rest of the stuff that we do.
Yeah, I've been keeping a list, and I actually like people that I see online, their workflow. I like, what did they use to get to this workflow? Because every workflow is different, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, right? The tools might be different, how you're using them.
Right.
And the tools are changing every day. I mean, every day there's something new that I'm reading. It's just impossible to keep up. So you're right. Like
100%. The thing I'm finding at the moment is that there's sort of, I'm going to say, like, it feels like there's a built-in negativity in social media to AI in terms of distribution.
Yeah.
I find that I can post just a regular photograph that hasn't been touched by AI, or if it's very minorly touched, it doesn't recognize it as an AI image. And it gets pretty well sort of liked and so on, or whatever. It gets distributed well. Anytime I produce an AI image, it really doesn't get much distribution at all, even though if there are comments, it's like, oh, great shot. Obviously I'm putting in the hashtags that it's AI and so on, but
Do you think
I
it's
don't
because
know.
people know, oh, this is like not really possible because it's so far out there of what really could be done? Or
I'm generally not generating content that's just surreal or abstract, but I'm finding that there's no question I can generate a shot now. Let's just say it's a generic shot of a guy jumping in the air with Nikes on, and he's a model. He looks great. He's ripped in on top of a building. I can generate that from scratch without needing to do anything related to photography. And at the end of the day, doing the shoot is the exciting process. There's no question that I get more kicks out of shooting real life content than you do necessarily sitting for 30 minutes and making that same image. But there's some sort of obviously cost benefit scenarios there for clients.
sure.
Some brands
Go ahead. You said
some
some
brands
brands
are moving into doppelgangers, as a preliminary approach, or a prime approach now, where they're just like scanning or getting sign off from models to utilize their looks to essentially then build the whole shoot in AI, which is clearly a path that is a lot of people are going to go down, and models might be lending their likeness more so than they are actually going on shoots.
Yeah, I've seen some things where, and it might even be something you posted, where it was like somebody sitting down and it was Christmas, and like then it was like Donald, like literally you
Donald Trump,
transform this generic person into Donald Trump sitting in front of this
right.
beautiful fireplace and whatever. But that idea of like literally you could take an image that's pretty simplistic and whatever, and then just totally change it to something fantastic.
I've been working for the last 12 months on tools that enable us, custom tools that enable us to build. For example, we can do a product correct vehicle because, of course, that's my background a little bit. So I've got a lot of experience in car photography and car shoots in general. We can build a product correct vehicle of any year, and we can put it in any environment for a fraction of the cost of a brand shoot where you would fly in 5 models of a vehicle or 5 different products. If you wanted to shoot a Jeep on the snow in Alaska, obviously that is a big production, and I've been and done those types of productions, but you are up in the millions of dollars of production. Now we can create that whole photo shoot and guarantee the light, guarantee the environment, guarantee the look of the car, guarantee every single aspect of it without leaving the office.
Yeah.
And I promise you, having shared some of the older images that we generated, nobody knows the difference. And so that's where there's some major shifts coming, I think, as one example of where the industry is going to change, is how AI, it might not necessarily be the people's favorite, but at the end of the day, brands and corporations are going to be, they've got a certain amount of budget, and if they can make that budget go that much further, certainly, and at the end of the day, the buyer sees it, doesn't really care. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
There's been a lot of shift in terms of perception. I think even today now that there's just a ginormous amount of people using chat, for example, relative to 12 months ago when we were all saying, oh, well, AI's bullshit, it's ripping everybody off and taking jobs and so on. And now it's like, AI is fucking amazing and I hate it, but I know it's going to be here. And so I need to get my head around.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to hear James Cameron say, because I have issues about copyright, right? You're creating images that you shoot. You don't want people ripping them off or somebody scraping them to be able to create basically your images or something similar to your images without you getting paid. But it was interesting to hear James Cameron say, look, kind of the genie's out of the bag about scraping these images and create using them in the LLMs and everything.
Yeah.
But really what we need to focus on is the output and getting the people compensated for the output use of
Yeah.
those things. And
Yeah.
I think that's, unfortunately where Congress and legislators are very far behind. And then, demanding the fact that, I'm sure these LLMs and the images that are generated from them know where they've pulled images from to regenerate images. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of, how do you compensate those people, right? For their, even if it's pennies on the dollar, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I agree. If there's a legitimate way of doing it so that you could tell where the data was taken and you can prove or ultimately leave it to the open AIs of this world to just be willing to pay out because they know that the LLM jumped into this set of data research and there was this 1,000 images that it went to that it kind of referenced, and every one of those people's images got a cent, a dollar, 1 cent or something. I think it's going to be really hard to actually implement, and I'm
I
not
agree.
convinced that the corporations are necessarily the people developing the AI are willing to do that at this point. It feels like more and more people are losing those battles.
Yeah.
And then again, it is referencing, in theory, it's referencing thousands, if not millions to billions of images to create that image that you've requested. And therefore, what, what a likeness is it to that image? I mean, I think that if you can prove that there's a likeness,
Yeah.
because the other thing I think we talked about a while ago, Ian, was this idea that we're all LLMs really in terms of our brains. Like we all, I certainly remember looking through books when we were coming up with concepts and ideas for clients
Sure.
and going, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to just, what we'd say is rip it off. But you'd kind of go, that's a great idea. Let's use that, but do this, and this, like change this, and this. You know what I mean? And we
Yeah.
end up delivering something to the client that was inspired by, referenced from, and give them
Yeah, I mean,
something.
usually our decks had reference images, right, from other projects that you were showing clients to try to get them to understand, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, your mood boards were basically everybody else's images. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it was almost like the data that you used to create your image.
right.
So, I know this isn't everybody's cup of tea, and certainly I'm not necessarily as defensive as some people might like to hear, but I think that there's a reality in that, creative people basically take images and create something inspired by a whole bunch of other images. And yes, there are those people that just pull something out of their ass that's unique. But, again, the speed that AI is moving, AI is going to be, and it has proven just recently to start doing that itself.
Yeah,
Um, and like I said, I spend hours a week in studying AI, so I'm like in deep with it, and I think we're past that time now. I would hope that artists get paid. I mean, obviously I've got a lot of data out there along with everybody else, and but I just think the realistic situation is that we've got to get on board with it because you can't fight this monster anymore. You just
yeah.
got to sort of learn how to utilize it to your advantage.
Well, that was what I was gonna, leads me to my question of, is traditional photography dead? Meaning,
Right.
and you were saying the same thing about buying lenses. Do we need a camera anymore? You know what I mean? Like,
It,
you're
yeah.
you're renting lenses because you're like, why should I pay thousands of dollars to buy these things?
Well, how long am I going to need these lenses for? That's the
Yeah,
question. And I think, more and more we're able to, like, we also, you mentioned Donald Trump, and we're also now able to replicate to a level. My team's able to replicate to a level that we can do Ian Dawson. We can put you in a perfume ad. People just look at you and go, "That's Ian Dawson holding a bottle of perfume." Not a problem. Without other than having reference images of you, that's all we need now. So there, I
well, in
think,
the movie here, by with Tom Hanks in it, they basically made an LLM, right, with all of his past work,
yeah,
images of him growing up,
yeah.
all different stages of him, and then basically created versions of him at different ages.
And
You
now
know,
the film industry is starting to accept AI into the awards system
yeah,
within movies. Um, so yeah, it's a great question. I think there's always going to be some level of requirement for photography. I believe more so that we are heading towards a requirement for great creative direction. And for creatives in general, whether you're photographers or any other aspect, filmmakers and so on, we're heading into a point where we will require, the industry will require fantastic creative directors with vision that recognize great content and are able to generate great content that is the same as we see now. You recognize a great shot from a crappy one, right? So I think that creatives in general are going to be less involved in production and more involved in creative direction. And I would encourage everybody to, obviously, AI is not, it's going to take over every aspect of all our businesses. And therefore, the way forward in that respect is to be a manager, an overseer, a creative director of those tools and understand those tools to be able to be a master of those tools within the industry that you're in.
yeah. That's why for me as a producer, I'm trying to understand workflows so I can
Yeah,
help those creatives understand kind of maybe processes to get
yeah,
to those things. But I think look, all the basic things for photography and cinematography, like I mentioned earlier, like you still need to know about lighting. You still need
absolutely.
to know about, lensing. You still need to
Yeah,
know about, depth of field and all of the different things that make up making a good image.
absolutely. And honestly, those are the prompts, for example, that the LLMs understand.
Yeah.
So they have been trained on old methods, if you like,
Yeah.
old ways of communicating, which recognize depth of field, recognize lens, what type of lens, even what camera, it recognizes all that. So there's no question that having that knowledge and experience is going to come into play moving forward. I mean, I think it's great news for everybody, that the skills that we have are still going to be recognized and understood. And the people that don't have those skills are basically jumping into AI without that experience. May take them a minute to even get to that point of having that level of ability with prompts and so on.
Yeah. So what worries you about AI?
I figured you were going to ask
Anything?
me that question. Um, I think that what it doesn't worry me so much, but I worry. There's definitely I worry for everybody in terms of an industry that I've been fortunate to experience and has been my life really, which is the creative industry and marketing, advertising, design, and so on, filmmaking to some degree. Um, that it's a scary scenario for everybody that's going to be in the anybody that's going to be in the industry for the next 5 to 10 years and more so is in a really challenging situation because the whole industry is moving in a place where there are going to be less and less roles for those people, even actors. I mean,
Yeah.
every aspect of this industry, models, actors, anybody you want in a commercial or anybody a photograph or a nurse in a brochure. I mean, not that anybody does brochures anymore, but you know, we don't need a model nurse now. You know, it's just you could write that prompt in 5 minutes, and we can create that video of her doing whatever she's doing in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So what
And
will
have
be,
20 different versions of that story, right?
yeah.
In a day or less, right? So
So it's not worry as much as empathy for people that are in the middle of this industry right now, that are faced with some real dilemmas, and almost like having to go back to school to learn it. And I was just thinking the other day, is like there's so much shift, like you mentioned, Ian, about, you know, you talk about workflow, but the workflow 3 months ago was different to the workflow today. I mean, every single time there's a new image to video model that comes out, it's just that bit better than the next model. So one time your workflow is mid-journey to runway, and then suddenly Flux comes out with something and you're like, oh shit, Flux is slightly better than runway, maybe
right.
I'll shift over to Flux. And you know, and then are you gonna sharpen slash upscale your images with another tool that makes it sort of higher resolution, and those tools shift. So there's a never ending changing workflow involved in the process. So it is a it's a scary place to be
Yeah.
for people. So if I'm worried for for people in general, in terms of what's happening in the industry, what's going to change. You know, chat's going to get better and better. It's going to give you a better writer. There's going to be specific GPTs for writing, advertising copy, that ultimately, maybe not now, but will come up with fantastic headlines.
Yeah.
You know, and we'll come up with great voiceovers, and you know, and we can go to 11 labs and knock out those voiceovers like somebody who's ultimately very talented at doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know who the stars are going to be in the future. You know, are we going to have, is the Brad Pitt of the future going to be an AI? I don't
Yeah.
know.
It's interesting. I was just speaking at Harvard at a Harvard XR conference, and the whole, digital twins was a big topic, but also, this integration of finally kind of AI and XR together. This whole idea that you will eventually have, your Jarvis, right, from Iron Man,
Yeah,
and your personal assistant
absolutely.
who will, you literally will just be able to say, hey, Siri or whatever, display me an image of blah, 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 blah. And
So
that will be there, and you'll be
that's
able to talk to it.
absolutely, the projection right now is for us all to have our own personal agent,
Yeah.
and essentially that agent will know everything about us. You know, assuming we allow that to happen. And so you'll let it inside every single aspect of our world. We'll have our own personal agent that we can talk to, and discuss all kinds of stuff with, that it understands our perspectives on it. So there will be we will have our own personal agent that will do things for us, will be communicating for us.
Yeah.
And honestly, the most future forward people out there will be having those agents. If not now, in the next 6 months, we're going to have agents that we're going to be able to customize for ourselves, for corporations, and corporations top down now are pushing into AI. It was the other way around before, where people were hiding the fact that they were using ChatGPT last year. Now
Right.
it's kind of, corporations are requesting their employees to use uh, chat, and ultimately agents are going to be integrated into every aspect, I think, of business.
Yeah. Well, I think education and training is a huge one right now, especially in that XR field.
China are going to destroy us if we don't keep up.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what would you say to those? I had 25 students come up to me after my talk at Harvard, and I had uh, interesting comments for them, right, about their future and what they're
Yeah,
studying and whatnot. But what would you say to those aspiring artists and photographers and cinematographers coming out of schools today?
I think learn the industry that you're working in, but concurrently learn all the tools that are representative of that industry at the same time. I think that you've got to be able to be multitasking at this point where, like you mentioned, lighting's a big deal. Learn lighting, absolutely. Learn the practicalities of lighting and understand how light works. But with the idea that you will be communicating with an AI to create that content in the future. There's no question, I've got a son, and I can't tell you, for the last 2 years, it's difficult. 2 years ago, he was 20 years old and he was like, yeah, whatever, just wasn't interested at all. And, I've just been hammering him for the last couple of years in like, dude, I kept sending him like new tools, editing to, he's into that kind of world himself. So, and he's now finally getting on board with it and using some AI tools to sort of create some content with. He's into 11 labs and playing around in there and stuff. So, yeah,
I mean, that's what I told the students that came up to me at Harvard. I was basically like, you got to learn these tools. You got to show people that you can tell stories. You've got to put that work out there. And that is your portfolio now, is like that you can use AI tools to tell stories, and that you can, and that you can prompt properly, and the images that come out of that prompt are what are showing your kind of capabilities, right?
Even music generating music with Suno, Udio, whatever the tool is, it's again just going to be taking away all this music we all want to use, as that we want to pay, or we don't want to pay, but we have to pay enormous amounts of money for. Now we can knock out a track that is like, shit, this sounds like it just came off the radio. And I made it in 15 minutes. And it's like my bass track for this thing that I'm making, this film or whatever, So I'm really excited about the future. Obviously, there is going to be some real challenges involved with people that are legitimately just trying to make a regular living. At the same time, it's going to be a future that's going to be, we're going to be experiencing just an enormous amount of new shit in a really fast period of time. Where I think, again, back in the day, you and I spoke about like VR and so on, and just waiting for the hardware to catch up, because we will all be wearing glasses or some kind of piece of hardware, and we'll be all doing it through that.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever thought of opening a new agency based on AI tools now, and AI stuff? I mean, I know you're working with some people, but
I'm not an agency. I think that the thing for me is that the agency world is to just becoming so disparate, I should say, and it's very difficult to know where your focus is when you're in the marketing industry right now. Social media is probably as big a focus as anything. But corporations are still knocking out commercials. I'm not sure how many people are seeing them, but they're still spending millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars on production.
Well, they're just using it in many different locations than they would just for broadcast, right? They're getting trying to get their bang for their buck for that 30 and 60.
They can almost, again, thinking of the future, you can almost sort of like, we can generate, for example, the cars. We can put a car in LA and make it, specific to LA. So your advertising can be specific to LA. Your advertising can be specific to Dallas. There are benefits to some of this stuff, but it's just more disparate and complex. I don't think there's a call for creativity anymore like there used to be back in the day when you and I were in our 30s and 40s, for example. When people give a shit about what something looked like, now it's just literally all back down to performance. Does it perform well or not? I've got a platform idea that I'm going to be sort of hoping to pursue, that is going to utilize a lot of the AI technologies to do something hopefully really cool and different. But we'll see. I'm certainly working with a group of guys right now where I think we might have something really interesting that we can share with the world at some point. But it's still early days, so things come and go. I've had several ideas and they just come and go. So we'll see.
Nice. I've been pushing people a lot to look at John Gata's site that he has called escape.ai.
Okay, I don't know that one.
It's really like a distribution platform for content creators of AI. So everything on there is just AI created.
Right.
And it ranges from like a minute and a half stuff to longer form, but
Yeah.
it's really cool that there's this one location where you could see all these creators work and what tools they used, and and that type
It
of
breaks
stuff.
it down into their workflow as well. Is that?
Yeah.
I think I was on another site that was really similar to that, which I signed up for because I was like, oh, great, I'm going to be able to learn some of the process or workflows they're using. Because you're right, it's like sometimes it's like, what's the magic formula to get that kind of quality image? So if there's any way of finding out like the methodology that they used, it's always a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've been kind of tracking a lot with, and trying to connect with those people and see how they're doing those things. So
Yeah.
I'm not one that's going to necessarily sit down and do a 3-minute piece myself or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just not in me. But I do need to know, and I want to know the workflows and what tools are the best tools and that type of stuff. So
absolutely. I mean, I'm definitely inspired to do some of that stuff. I've been knocking out a few sort of short things, and I've got something I'm going to post, which probably get 50 views or whatever, but that's a bit more down that path. But definitely lighthearted and fun. But I've been enjoying making longer form videos. But of course, just compared to, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, where we were just posting an image and it was super easy to do. Now it's like, to get any traction whatsoever, you can put in hours of time editing and prepping something to get like, oh yeah, it's all right, swipe.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody gives a shit anymore, man.
No, because you can make anything. I mean, that's one of the amazing things, is that whatever you can dream up, you can actually make now. I mean, think of all those movies that cost, $100 million or $200 million. That was a space sci-fi that nobody wanted to make the investment on, that
Right.
you could do yourself or with a team of like 3 people, right? So
I think that's really exciting though, because we may well get once again these really outrageous movies that are really exciting, really creative, really unique, and affordable for the movie industry. And so it might not necessarily be that there's people losing their jobs as much as there's more content available for us to watch that is really great and exciting.
I was talking to a financial guy, who finances movies and whatever, and he was saying, like, nobody wants to finance anything more than $5 million anymore, because they look at Nora, right, which $6 million movie that won an Academy Award and made whatever $100 million or whatever. They know, the investors are getting smart to know that, like, these tools and these stories can be created for less money.
Yeah.
And the upside is huge and the downside is a lot less. So,
well, I mean, if you look back to the beginning of last year, there was like the big movie industries, everybody's voting against any kind of change and so on, all anti-AI. And now you're starting to see them outwardly communicating the fact that they're investing in AI. And again, it was like doom and gloom, but the reality is that this potentially means we are likely to get a lot more content, a lot of it probably being shit, but some of the good content being really good and really exciting, because we might well get more $100-200 million movies from several years ago that are being made a lot more of that level of movie, but for a lot less money. So we might be seeing loads of new, cool, exciting movies that look like hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet they spent 10 million on it.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, every new technology, right, has its ups and downs and pros and cons. So you had mentioned that, you're working on a project. Is there passion projects or anything, what's next in your journey of?
Well, yeah, I do a lot of things, I guess. So, I'm like I said, I'm advising. I'm an advisor for several companies. So some of my time's taken up with that. I build homes as well. So
yeah, we talked a little bit
some
about
of my
that.
more miserable times are spent with doing that. Still doing my photography. Moving into more humanitarian work, still working for some of these charities, and then all my sort of like passion time is all focused right now on AI in one shape, one way, shape or form. I just see it being completely dominating our planet, and I want to make sure that I'm ahead of the game, and like I said, be able to maybe help a lot of other people, because you get to a certain age, and probably I'm sure you're similar, where, and I heard this on a podcast the other day. It was like, it's funny, as you get older, you want to help other people more.
Yeah.
And going back to my 20s, it was all about us getting money and winning, and now I'm like, I genuinely take pleasure in helping other people succeed.
Yeah.
That's also a win for me, if you know what I mean. That's my kick.
Sure.
Is just helping other people. So moving forward, I've really enjoyed in the last few years being an advisor, and even just giving people advice just flippantly or whatever, But I think being part of other people's successes is also a real joy.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I still need to make some money and do stuff, but I do love, passing on information and sharing that kind of information transfer. And I also think it's really important for people to understand sort of the past, the history of, visual effects and photography and all these other things, to be able to inform their, the future. So I try to instill in that they learn a lot about, the history of their medium that they're interested in. So
there's definitely, students is a world that is definitely more challenging. I think anybody in the middle of their industry right now, in terms of, they're in the 30s/40s, they've learned a lot already. I think that knowledge is going to become very useful as we move more and more into the AI world. And their experience will also be very useful. And I think it's going to be a challenge for, like, for example, I mean, I go back to the point where I'm pre the internet. I mean, I was at art college when we were painting circles with a brush, and we had no computers whatsoever, or nothing.
Right. There was no paint box either or anything, right?
It was not a computer screen, not like nothing. So it didn't even exist when I was at art college. So, I've been through the internet shift, when the web was invented, which obviously made huge changes to the world up until this point. But again, that it's just a drop in the ocean compared to what AI is doing. And again, like I say, I just encourage everybody to just, take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, Simon, thank you so much for, being on the podcast, giving us a little bit of, your story and your background and what you're doing right now. And it's really a pleasure talking to you. And again, I'll keep looking out for the work that you're doing, and hopefully we keep getting to run into each other. And
absolutely, mate. I've really enjoyed the chat. It's always fun talking about something I actually have a passion for.
That's great. Well, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.